everyone. Welcome to episode number 690 of this here electronic engineering podcast called Amelia's Weekly Fish Fry. Brought to you by eejournal.com and written, produced, and hosted by yours truly, Amelia Dalton. Folks, today we're diving deep into a realm of cybersecurity that is often overlooked but increasingly critical: the silicon itself. For years, the industry has poured billions into software and network defenses. But as the threat landscape evolves, the hardware is becoming the primary target. My guest today is Jason Oberg from Arteris. Jason and I discuss the seismic shift toward hardware security, explore how Cycuity's integration into Arteris is changing the game for system-level security, and how teams can address the emerging risks in our era of distributed systems, chiplets, and constant data movement. So, without further ado, please welcome Jason to Fish Fry. Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Okay, so for years, cybersecurity investment has focused on software and networks. So, what's changed in the threat landscape that's driving the rise in hardware vulnerabilities and making silicon a primary target?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's actually pretty amazing. There's been a pretty significant increase in hardware vulnerabilities in the last, say, 5+ years or so. A lot of that's really attributed to a couple things. I think first, a big factor is that modern chip designs are obviously just getting more and more complicated, both in terms of the IP that they're leveraging as well as the gate count. And there's obviously with the whole era of AI and LLMs, there's huge demands for performance, right? And all of this layered on top of each other just dramatically increases the complexity of chip designs. And as sort of complexity is always of benefit to the attacker. So, security issues are always hidden in complexity. And so as we've seen designs just get more and more complicated, ensuring that the designs are behaving securely is becoming more and more challenging. So I think that's one really big kind of macro component to this. The other one that's probably a little bit less obvious to certain folks is that a lot of these hardware issues can actually be exploited from software. So there was a big learning when these original Meltdown Inspector kind of based issues came out, where modern hardware, modern chips have a lot of shared resources in them, and they have a lot of performance features, like I just mentioned. You might be sharing the same physical chipset, with different applications running on your phone, or in a cloud environment, you have different VMs sharing the same physical chipsets. And there's a lot of issues that can come up with that, sharing that hardware. Information can leak between these two different kind of users or abstraction levels, whether it's a VM or an application or what have you. And a lot of it, attackers kind of figured out how to exploit some of that sharing in pretty sophisticated ways. And this is Meltdown Inspector, the first instance of this, but even beyond how those attacks were first done, there's been tons and tons of new ways of looking at kind of hardware exploits from software. So really, I think those are kind of two key driving factors, is just some really new learnings about how to exploit these issues from software. And then also just a lot of these security issues are just really buried in a lot of this complexity. And that complexity is coming from demands for high performance and so on.
So, Cycuity has been focused on identifying and mitigating hardware vulnerabilities early in the design process. Now that Cycuity is part of Arteris, how does that expand what you can deliver to customers, especially as security becomes a system level challenge?
No, absolutely. And kind of goes back to what I just mentioned about, system complexity. The modern chipset has, hundreds of subsystems that are all interconnected by a complex, system interconnect, like a NOC or some variant of that. And, that's really the kind of the core foundation of data movement across the chip. It's how, a secure subsystem might talk to another one. There's a lot of kind of access control built into this and so on. And so really looking at how you can actually add security assurance to the NOC and enable security assurance kind of across that system interconnect is really a key component to help address these issues early on. You can sort of proactively mitigate things. You can identify security weaknesses and kind of generate special NOC configurations, all this type of stuff to actually address these fundamental security weaknesses that may occur in that complexity. So kind of being part of the Arteris umbrella really helps, I'd say, give us broader reach in how we can apply our unique technology to address some of those kind of system level the large scale chip types of issues.
So, Jason, as systems become more distributed with constant data movement and growing use of chiplets, where do you see the biggest security risks emerging? And how should teams be thinking about them differently?
There's a sort of fundamental issue with security, right? Is as an ecosystem becomes more fragmented and the less control like a system integrator has over the different components, security issues are going to come up, right? So like in a perfect world, from a security standpoint, you'd have the one person that's building the chip is building all of the, subsystems, writing all the Verilog, building all the software, doing all of that ground up themselves. Very few companies do that. Some do, but very few do. And with kind of the growing use of chiplets, this becomes exacerbated because you have these subsystems that are really complex. Think of it as very complex third-party IP, but they're, full subsystems that the integrator of those at the chiplet level have, obviously they know what the spec is of what it should do, but they don't really know what's going on inside it. So there's a lot of assumptions that need to get made about how this gets integrated, these types of things. Because of that sort of fragmentation and obviously with the complexity of these systems, it's pretty easy to make mistakes. I think there's interesting opportunities for the system interconnect in this as well, though, because obviously, the interconnect is what's connecting all these different subsystems up, at the chiplet level. And so I think there's unique opportunities to help provide some assurance at that interconnect level to at least help de-risk some system level fundamental issues. But at the same time, this is a challenge because, as things become more fragmented in the ecosystem and individual stakeholders don't have full control over everything that's getting developed, security is just always at odds with that. That's the case in any market. And so I think there's going to be a lot of challenges that come up with this that are going to be pretty hard to deal with.
So, traditional verification ensures a design works as intended, but that doesn't necessarily make it secure. So, Jason, where are the gaps and why are they becoming more exposed now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole concept in the design and verification domain around like functional verification, right? So you have a spec for what the chip should do. You can build a verification plan according to that and ensure the design works correctly. When it comes to security, you're really looking at things that are, I don't say out of spec, but things that you hadn't really thought about. And so there's this whole concept of negative testing and trying to find things that may be unknown behavior. And that's part of what our technology at Cycuity now, Arteris Security, is really good at is that it uses unique technology that's sort of symbolic. If we can actually look at identifying areas of the design and leakages in the design and these types of things that wouldn't have normally been thought of. And so really the kind of key gap is providing technology and tools that can help identify sort of these unknown cases and help do that a lot more systematically than the conventional approaches. And that's a core area we're really focusing on is helping enable those sort of for the unknown spaces and try to find things that may not have been exposed by the conventional functional verification techniques.
So, the security technology is focused on asset-based security and information flow analysis. So, Jason, how does that approach work in practice? And how does it help teams identify vulnerabilities earlier in the design process?
Yeah, no, so this is the really unique thing that we offer is it's really, like I said, as you mentioned, Mason, this concept of information flow. Sounds like a very fancy word, but essentially what we're doing is we can actually track the flow of information by, marking and saying this is actually is any information from this secure asset ending up somewhere that it shouldn't? And we do that in sort of a symbolic or information theoretic standpoint. So if any information is derived from that asset, whether it's one bit of that or maybe it gets transferred value, these types of things. We can cover all of those types of cases as well as overall time. And so by kind of using this unique approach, it really helps identify a lot of the gaps that traditional verification has, where you're just looking at functional specs. By integrating this into kind of that existing functional verification environment, we can identify a lot of different unknowns. Data may end up somewhere that wasn't expected. Maybe there's some key material or some information that may be leaking somewhere that's unexpected. I mentioned earlier about this kind of shared tenant environments, that's sort of making sure information from a VM1, virtual machine one that might belong to one user doesn't leak to another user in some way. There's no observable information flow across those two domains. And so it's a very fundamental technology that helps identify a lot of things that usually folks wouldn't think about. And then we leverage a lot of the existing functional verification environments so that the integration is easy and that it doesn't put the burden on the customer to do a very complex analysis from scratch.
So, with AI making it easier for adversaries to execute sophisticated multi stage attacks, how does the security technology from Arteris empower designers to outpace AI powered hardware exploits?
Yeah, no, this is a scary one. So I think we've seen a lot in the news about the LLMs being very good at identifying software vulnerabilities, right? And automating those and actually, and exploiting them and so on. So it's pretty scary stuff. I mentioned earlier about how one of the big learnings and why a lot of hardware security is becoming more prevalent is because a lot of the hardware weaknesses can be exploited from software. And so I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think the way these are trending, I mean, there's a lot of research papers, a lot of code snippets, there's a lot of software-based attacks that exploit, performance features in modern chips. It's highly likely that you could train an LLM to learn about what those attacks are doing and then create new ones, new variants of that, and things that we wouldn't have thought about. And so to really protect against that, it's very fundamental, right? So we're very focused on ensuring this whole concept of the root cause weakness is detected. So there's this relationship of weakness and vulnerabilities where weakness is sort of the core element that was exploited in an actual exploited vulnerability. And these weaknesses are sort of baked into the kind of core implementation. And so if there's a weakness focused approach on proactively identifying the kind of the fundamental issues, these fundamental weaknesses that will be in these designs and mitigate those, then when it comes to chaining these kind of complex software-based attacks on hardware, it becomes a lot more difficult because the kind of core weakness that some of those software exploits are actually taking advantage of, they're no longer exploitable. And so I think a lot of companies are moving in that direction to ensure that kind of at the foundational level, these security weaknesses are being mitigated. And I think that's going to be really, really important to help prevent some of these kind of more AI-based attacks. The last thing I'll say on that specifically, that's why some of our core technology is it's so fundamental in terms of information flow that if you can ensure at a hardware level that no information can flow from, between two domains like two VMs or between two regions, then it's actually not possible, even if there was a complex software configuration that could be derived, because that information flow is actually never possible. Having that kind of mindset when chips are being built, I think is going to be really important to help prevent against these kind of very scary hardware-based attacks.
All right, Jason, it's time for your off the cuff question. So, if you could have one meal right now, it doesn't matter if it's from the other side of the world, you need a passport to get there, what would you have?
I would probably have some cold soba noodles. They're surprisingly very hard to find. And, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have a lot of great food here. We have pretty much everything that you could want. But for some reason, those are hard to find. I love soba noodles, and especially cold soba noodles. They're awesome. So that's what I would have.
Nice, good choice. Well, Jason, I think that's all I have time for today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Amelia. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Did you know that we have an entire fish frying playlist dedicated to security? It's true. On YouTube, we have a super cool playlist of security related interviews, which includes my discussion with Silent CEO Ted Morocco about the increased prevalence of software piracy in automotive designs and what can be done to stem the tide of unauthorized software use today. This playlist also includes my discussion with Cynthia Wright, principal cybersecurity engineer at the MITRE Corporation, about the many layers of cybersecurity in IoT, what the weaponization of everything is all about, and why privacy by design, security by design, and resiliency by design will play a vital part in the future of the Internet of Things. In addition to a whole lot of other exciting security-related interviews, this playlist also includes my chat with Richard Janicki from Green Hills Software about satellite security and vulnerability, and how satellites can be hacked and what solutions we need to implement in order to keep our satellites safely in orbit. So if you want to binge any or all of these podcast episodes, I've included a direct link to this playlist on this week's Fish Fryin' page on eejournal.com. I've also included a bunch of links about Arteris as well. And you can also find all of these links on this week's YouTube episode as well. Hey, have you checked out EE Journal on social media yet? Well, you should. You can find us at facebook.com/EEJournal. If LinkedIn is more your thing, I dig it. You can follow us or me on LinkedIn. And we are also on Blue Sky Social and Mastodon as well. And we have that YouTube channel I just mentioned, youtube.com/EEJournal. Folks, it is chock full of all kinds of techie videos, including our very popular Chalk Talk webcast series, hosted by me. And of course, you can subscribe to our EE Journal YouTube channel as well. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you know of any cool new technology or heck you just want to chat, shoot me a line at Amelia, that's AMELIA, at eejournal.com, or post a comment on our forums on EE Journal. For the week of July 17th, 2026, I'm Amelia Dalton, and you've been fried.